All right, let's continue our discussion with the idea of creating independence between parts, not only the parts of a chord voicing as we went over in the last technique, but also in different instrumental parts, if you will. For example, the difference between a bass line and a chordal figure. And this is very important when you're playing fingerstyle jazz guitar. You're essentially creating the illusion of more than one player playing the music. And that way, the music will sound much more animated and lifelike as opposed to sounding flat. As we've explored in the last couple of techniques, a lot of this is achieved through the left hand and the articulation. So let's work through an exercise that will really promote independence, but also unity in terms of the bass line and the chord notes together. So if you look in your example, what we have in the tab here is just an A13 chord, A dominant 13. Now we're going to look at this chord in two parts. The first part, the lower part, is going to be simply the bass, the root note. But this is our bass part. The second part is the chord. Now we're going to think of those three notes in the chord as one part. That's your chord voicing. And an easy way to visualize this would be to imagine a pianist, somebody sitting down on the keyboard. The right hand is going to take care of the chords, and the left hand will play the bass part. So it's easy to visualize those two parts independent of another. But in this case, on a guitar, obviously we just have one hand to work with. So we need to develop these different articulation techniques. And it's actually pretty simple. All we got to do is just continue to develop our sustained or held and then release or popped technique. So if we were to think about these two different parts, there's four ways that we can articulate each part, both separate and together. One is that both are held down, both are sustained. And then the second articulation would be both are short, both are staccato, both are popped. And then, of course, the bass can be sustained and held down while the chord is popped, and vice versa. You can pop the bass, so play each note short while the chord is held down. So those are the four different articulations that are notated in your example here. In terms of, playing those, it's just a matter of realizing the independence between the parts with the fingers that we developed in the last exercise, and then simply bouncing or releasing the parts that need to be staccato and sound. So if we look at the first example here, everything is short, and short notes are indicated with a staccato symbol, just the dots above or below each pitch. So if we're going to play both parts short, it's just a matter of plucking the strings with our right hand, and as soon as the notes are sounded, then release those as quickly as you can, and release them all together. Try to release them at the same time as opposed to something like that. Sounds a little sloppy. Try to get them all to just pop together. If we're going to have both chords and bass sustained, then you just simply keep the fingers pressed down, fretted. So just between those two examples, that's an enormous disparity in articulation here. Let me show you, in time, if we have sustained and then staccato. This is a technique that I learned from Tuck Andrus many years ago, and it's a very powerful technique that will really bring your music to life, whether you're playing in a solo guitar situation or accompanying a singer or a horn player or any situation where you're going to be playing sort of an orchestral approach to a guitar. Now let's take it a step further and combine both, short and long notes between the different parts. So if we're going to hold down the bass, then we're simply going to keep the first finger fretted while fingers 2, 3, and 4 are popped. And it would sound like this. The opposite of that, you would hold out the chord, hold down 2, 3, and 4, and then pop the first finger for the bass. Generally speaking, in a swing jazz style, we have a walking 4 bass line. The bass is going to be held and sustained. It's going to be much more smooth and legato feeling. And then the chords, you want to have the facility to play those both held and sustained, as well as short and staccato and popped. So listen to the difference between those two articulations, combining the bass and chord parts. So here's the bass long. Now the bass short. Bass long. Bass short. Now, if we combine all four combinations or play all four combinations in succession, you'll really hear this amazing difference in sound between all of them. And it's all being dictated by the left hand. The right hand is simply plucking the strings. But these are the kind of considerations, it's kind of thinking micro. These are the kind of considerations that you want to think of when you're building a guitar arrangement. You don't want to just technically play those independent parts, but rather you want to, in addition to technically achieving them, articulating them in a way so that they sound musical and lifelike and swinging, ultimately. So here are all four examples. We're going to start with both bass and chords short, as indicated in your handout, then 4 times both parts long, then bass short, chords long, and then bass long, chords short. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.